Welcome and thank you for joining us for today's BestRide.com Facebook Live. And today we're going to be tackling the age-old dilemma of finding the safest car for your family. My name is Eliana Raggio. It's my pleasure to be your moderator today. And it's also my pleasure to introduce you to the guy who's got all the answers. Joe Young. He is the Media Relations Director at the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety, where he serves as the main point of contact for journalists seeking traffic safety information, and he oversees the Institute's social media presence as well. Mr. Young joined the Institute in 2017 after working in communications with the Louisiana SPCA in New Orleans. Mr. Young received a bachelor's degree from Tulane University and holds an MBA from the University of New Orleans. Oh, he's an underachiever, I can see. But Joe, thank you so much for being here with us today. And I know we have a lot to cover. All right, how you doing, Joe? You ready for this?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm doing great. I appreciate you guys having me.
Are you kidding? We are the ones that are honored. Thank you so much. We've never had IIHS here before, but we thought it was perfect to ask you to do this broadcast because, in your role at IIHS, you have access to an incredible amount of data and research. And, we're always keeping the car shoppers in mind. And car shoppers are really curious about safety ratings and which cars are safer. And for all the money that they invest in their automobiles, they want to know if that fateful day comes when they get into a car accident, are they going to be able to get up and walk away, right? So
Yep.
With everything that the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety does, your safety ratings, they're like legendary, and we're just so happy. But I'd love to give the consumers a little bit more background information on IIHS. So before we actually dive into the conversation, I'd love it if you could share what IIH does. First of all, how did it ever come to be? You guys have been around for a while. Can you tell us the background on it, Joe?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety was founded in 1959. We're an independent nonprofit research and communications organization. And our mission is to reduce the losses on the nation's highways. So preventing injuries, preventing deaths, and property losses as well. IHS came into being in 1959. At that time, we were more just sort of assisting other research organizations. But about 10 years later, we were sort of reorganized into what IHS is now, which is more of an independent organization doing its own research. The Highway Loss Data Institute, which folks may be less may not know about it quite as much, is a sister organization of IHS and was founded in the 1970s and shares the same mission, but does so through analyses of insurance loss data. That's kind of who we are. However, when you think of IHS, you may think of crash testing. That kind of came later. We opened our Vehicle Research Center in the mid-1990s here in Central Virginia, where we crash test vehicles in a variety of crash test configurations in order to encourage automakers to improve how vehicles perform in various crashes and make vehicles safer. We drive this change through consumer information rather than sort of regulations like the government does. We are essentially sort of trying to communicate which vehicles are safer than others so that people will buy them, and it will encourage the automakers to continue to make them safer. So that's just one of the things we do, and I know that's sort of the subject of today. If folks are interested, check out iihs.org, and you can kind of dive into our whole research arm as well.
No, I appreciate that. Okay, so before IIHS was formed and started doing these crash tests, are you saying that it was kind of like the wild, wild west? Whatever cars got put out there, that's the cars and like manufacturers weren't really concerned about safety so much. Was that kind of the story?
Well, I think it's true that for a long time, safety wasn't really a selling point. But there's always been regulations. Well, not always, but for many years, there's been regulations in place around, the different safety features that automobiles need to have. But IHS has always been about looking at, the real world data, seeing what the outcomes are, and figuring out how we can introduce new tests or new research that can help drive change to improve that. So, For example, in the mid 90s, the federal government was running crash tests of sort of a full barrier, right? Imagine just running flat into a brick wall. Well, the real world data suggested that a lot of people are being injured and killed in crashes where there was only a partial overlap with your crash partner, right? So all that energy is loading only one side of the vehicle, which is more challenging from a physics standpoint. So we started running an offset crash, a 40% offset crash. And what we found is that a lot of vehicles that were performing just fine in these flat barrier crash tests were performing pretty badly in these more challenging crash test configurations.
Okay, so you started a conversation. I am so glad you did, because I was really curious about what kind of testing IIH performs. And I think we have a video of one of the crashes. If you could just walk, oh gosh, if you could just walk us through what we're seeing here.
Sure.
Is this the 40% off thing that you were talking
So
about?
this is actually more of a research and demonstration test. So most of our crash tests that you're going to see, like on our YouTube channel, for instance, involve barriers, right? So we're crashing into a fixed object. This is actually a demonstration test to show off something that we talk about a lot, which is the importance of size and weight in a vehicle-to-vehicle crash. You can see this crash is between a Toyota Camry and a Toyota Yaris. And there's a significant weight difference between those vehicles. And you can see that the Yaris really doesn't hold up very well, right? So this is a vehicle, the 2009 Yaris, that would have performed fine in a barrier crash test. We always tell people, look, if you're shopping for a vehicle within a given category, you can compare crash test ratings. But if you're considering an SUV and a small car, in the real world, those two vehicles are actually going to provide different levels of protection. And the reason is that they have different weights, they're different sizes, and physics always prevail in a car crash, right? So we always tell folks that, driving the smallest vehicle on the road, there's a safety drawback there, because you're likely to crash with something bigger than you. And that means your vehicle has to hold up better in a crash. It has to take that energy and distribute it. It's more energy than that bigger car. So that's just a quick demonstration test, and we got lots of crash tests if folks are interested in checking them out on our YouTube channel.
Let's talk about the different, because you even test the roofs, you tested rear crash test. Well, what are the major crash tests that IIH performs?
Yeah, so I talked about one, which is that offset crash test we introduced back in the 1990s. That's called our moderate overlap frontal crash test. That's one of 3 frontal tests we run. So we now run an additional test called the driver's side small overlap crash test. So it's similar in that the vehicle is only interacting with the barrier sort of on the outer edge of the vehicle. Imagine if you were driving along and went off the road and the outer edge of your vehicle were to strike a pole or some sort of fixed object. Okay. So all that crash energy is really focused into a small area. So we started doing that test back in about 2013, because again, the real world data were showing that people were still getting killed and injured in these types of crashes. So we wanted to draw attention to that and encourage the automakers to improve those sort of side structures. And by the way, that's really challenging, because the main structural elements in a vehicle are essentially bypassed when you have a crash that's focused in that area. So we run that test on the driver's side. And a few years back, we did some research and found out that, hey, automakers are doing a good job in that test now, but we're not seeing that they're actually putting the same structure in many cases into the passenger side. So we started doing a passenger side test to make sure that folks that are sitting up in that front passenger seat are getting the same level of protection in that type of crash as a driver would. So we've got our 3 frontal tests. We also run a side crash test. Back in 2003, we implemented our original side crash test. So the government also runs a side crash test. But what we were finding is that due to the change in the vehicle fleet, with vehicles getting bigger, more SUVs and pickups, we were finding that the government's test, which used this movable barrier it's sort of like a cart that essentially hits the side of the test vehicle, it kind of had a lower face. It was more like a sedan striking your vehicle. So we introduced a new test that actually used a taller barrier that strikes the side of the vehicle. And what we wanted to make sure is that automakers were improving the side structure to hold up in those crashes, and also putting in airbags that had a lot of protection for your head in those types of crashes, because that's absolutely essential. Of course, when you get hit in the side, there's not a lot of space. There's not a lot of structure there to protect you. So those side curtain airbags are essential. So we started that test in 2003. We've seen vehicles get so much better in side protection. We've actually just launched a new side test, an updated side test with a new barrier, faster impact speed. It's a heavier barrier. Those things combined, it's actually 82% more energy in our new updated side crash test, which, by the way, we've only released one group of ratings so far, and only one vehicle has achieved our top rating of good in that brand new crash test mode. So those are the tests that you might be used to seeing if you've checked out our YouTube page. But we do have two other tests that maybe are a little less interesting to watch, but still very important. One would be the head restraints evaluation, which this, if you've ever been rear-ended, you know that whiplash injuries, can happen really easily in that type of crash. And your head restraint, some people call it a headrest. It's not a headrest. You're not supposed to, sleep on it. It's a head restraint. It's designed exactly to protect you when you get hit from behind and keep your neck from bending backwards too far. So we do a head restraint test where we actually take the vehicle seat out of the car and mount it onto a special test sled. We sort of do an acceleration forward, and we have a special dummy that we use in that type of test to measure those neck forces. So that's another area we've seen great improvements. Head restraints now are just so much better than they were even a decade ago. So and then finally, you mentioned earlier our roof strength test. So, rollovers aren't as common as they once were. Electronic stability control, which is a really important thing that's in all new cars.
We're going to get
there. Has done a good job of helping us stay out of rollover crashes. But when a car rolls over, its roof needs to hold up in order to maintain that occupant space inside and give you a chance to survive, right? So our roof strength test, we put the vehicle up on this special area, and we use this plate, and we slowly put pressure onto the vehicle's roof. And what we want to see is that the vehicle can withstand at least 4 times its own weight before crushing 5 inches. That way, if you're in a rollover crash and your airbags are going to deploy, but you've got to make sure that area you're sitting in holds up. We always kind of equate it to sending a package. If you send a package from here to Los Angeles and it arrives all beat up, I mean, there's a much greater chance that the stuff inside is going to be broken than if it arrives completely intact, right? So we want to see that package stay intact.
Okay, I'm like visualizing all of these crash tests. It's not hard to do with your background where you're sitting. Okay, so it sounds like you do 6 different tests per model. And great question just came in from Haley. And I think I had the same question for you, which is how do you get the cars to test? I mean, are you crashing 6 different cars for each make model to test them? That's a lot of cars.
Yeah. So I'll kind of answer that in 2 parts. So first of all, where we get the cars to test is the same spot you would if you were shopping for a new vehicle. We want to make sure we're getting. We head out to the dealerships, around the area here in Central Virginia. We often have to look further than that as well to get the vehicles we're looking for. But yeah, we buy them from the dealership. We want to make sure that we're getting the same car that you would get if you went out shopping, and we're not getting something that might have some special structure built into it. So yeah, so we get our vehicles from dealerships. And to your point about how we are able to maintain ratings for so many vehicles, and by the way, we've got on our website ratings for over 200 models. The good news is we don't have to test each model every single year in 6 different crash tests. I mean, first of all, that there can be years between redesigns, so very often those ratings will carry over from one year to the next. Also, very often, within a given manufacturer, you might see that a rating can carry from one SUV to the other that are built on the exact same platform. So we do see ratings carry from one to the other. In that case. But we also have a program in place that we launched a few years back where we're actually giving the automakers the opportunity, if they want to have an IHS rating on a vehicle, but it's maybe not on our normal test calendar, what they can do is actually perform the test themselves at their facility or at an independent facility, submit the data to us. So that would be photographs, video, all of the crash test dummy data, the measurements. And our engineers will actually look at it and then make sure that, and then issue a rating based on that. And we maintain the integrity of that program, which we call our verification test program, by performing audits. So we regularly will perform audits of those tests to make sure that we get the same result here at our Vehicle Research Center that we would get that they've submitted to us. So that makes sure that this is running smoothly. And by the way, I should point out that we have pretty good relationships with the automakers.
Mhm.
You know, they want to do well in our tests. So we do have. It wasn't always that way back in the 90s. They weren't very happy with us, but since then we do have pretty good relationships with them. But we aren't afraid to call them out when they get a bad test result, for sure.
Oh my goodness. I really, really am finding this very, very fascinating, Joe. I
Good.
know consumers are as well. I mean, because you say now, the manufacturers maybe weren't so happy with IIHS and the results that their cars were getting in the 90s, but now safety is a huge selling point. Consumers look for cars that have great safety ratings, and IIHS, like I said earlier, your safety ratings are legendary. And I've even seen a lot of manufacturers put, those IIHS awards in their advertising, which is fantastic. That's absolutely what they should be doing. So I'm so excited. I love what you are doing over there at the Institute. So now that we know IIHS just a little bit better, why don't we dive in? Because I know you had already mentioned at least one advanced safety feature that you liked. So let's talk about some advanced safety features that you recommend, because a lot of consumers out there, they want to know if those safety features are actually worth the money. So, Joe, I'm just going to ask you right now. Let's rattle off some of your favorites. Why is it worth the money? I know you have the research, how many lives it saves, and that kind of thing. So, talk to me about your favorite advanced safety features, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. Yeah. So, you know, when you go out to buy a new car right now, there can be a lot of technology packed into it. Some of it is now standard equipment. So, for example, you go to the dealership, you're going to purchase a vehicle. It's going to have a backup camera. Those have been required for several years now.
I love mine.
It's gonna have electronic stability control, which is a really important crash avoidance technology I mentioned earlier. You know, this is sort of an extension of anti-lock brakes, but it essentially, you know, keeps your vehicle moving in the direction it's supposed to be, by applying, you know, braking pressure to the wheels independently in a situation where you might be losing control. So that helps you maintain control of the vehicle. But there are lots of new features out there that aren't standard equipment. You know, one that people might be familiar with is automatic emergency braking. So, or you know, sometimes this is called front crash prevention technology. But this is essentially that technology where if you're coming up on a stopped vehicle in front of you, and perhaps you as the driver are distracted or somehow just not paying attention, you know, your vehicle will first issue you a warning, letting you know that you're about to hit something. And then if you don't respond, it will actually automatically apply the brakes for you. So we've done a ton of research on this technology, and we know it is highly effective. You know, vehicles with this technology are involved in about 50% fewer front to rear crashes than vehicles without the technology. And we've seen that in analyses of police reported crashes. We can see that in the insurance data as well. So this is a really important technology, and we actually started evaluating vehicles for that technology, you know, a few years back, because we wanted to encourage automakers to fit that technology on more vehicles, but also, you know, to make sure it's good, make sure it's performing well. So if someone goes out and spends extra money on it, we want it to perform well. So we basically take test vehicles and we run them at this sort of dummy car, and we see how well they respond in various test scenarios. So automatic emergency braking, definitely worth the money. And in fact, starting at the end of this year, that is going to be a standard feature on new vehicles, thanks to a voluntary commitment that automakers have entered into. So this isn't a regulatory requirement, but the automakers, IHS and NHTSA, that's the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, approached the automakers about, you know, entering this voluntary commitment. And so they've done that. So by the end of this year, that's going to be standard equipment. It's already standard on quite a few vehicles. So if you go out and buy a new car today, it's very likely that it would have automatic emergency braking. So that's worth the money for now, and it's, you know, it's not something you're gonna have to think about after the end of this year. So a few others that are still, and actually I should mention before I move on that you know, these systems, these automatic emergency braking systems, now recognize pedestrians as well, which is incredibly important. You know, anyone in the highway safety field has seen that pedestrian deaths have just been on the rise in recent years. And we think that this technology is one thing that could really help. So we actually started rating vehicles in pedestrian scenarios as well a few years back. And what we saw initially was that only about 20% of the vehicles we were evaluating were getting our top rating of superior.
Wow.
Now we're seeing more than 50% are getting that top rating. And so we're really excited to see that vehicles are improving there. So that's really important. And we've seen in the real world data as well that cuts pedestrian crashes by about 30%. And when you talk about a pedestrian crash, I mean, even reducing your impact speed could have a major impact on the, have a major difference in the outcome, right? So hitting a pedestrian at 25 is way different than if your vehicle sees that pedestrian, responds, and is able to get that vehicle down to 10 miles per hour. That's a big difference in outcome. So that's a really important technology as well. And we're seeing it on a lot more vehicles as well. So another couple that folks are probably folks are familiar with would be lane departure warning. These are these systems that will let you know if you're kind of drifting out of your lane. And these are proven to reduce crashes as well that result from folks running out of their lane. So that's another one that's worth the money for sure. And then blind spot warning, which has a little indicator in your usually on the mirror itself, letting you know if there's someone in your blind spot, because that can be a challenge. Sometimes you might give it a quick look, but having that little indicator there makes a big difference. We can see that in the police reported crash data. We can see it in the insurance data that technology is helping reduce those types of crashes quite a bit. So that's another one that I would definitely encourage you to check out. And then finally, I just want to throw this out there. People may not think of this as a crash avoidance technology, but headlights. And I know we're going to talk a little bit more about headlights later, but just know that when you go shopping for a vehicle, there's a big difference in headlight performance on the vehicles available in the United States. And even on a given model, there may be multiple headlight options that perform vastly different. So we, again, launched a headlight ratings program a few years back. I think we're going to talk more about that later, but just something to keep in mind when you go to the dealership.
Wow, you threw out a lot. Right, there was a lot of stuff to unpack, Joe. Thank you for that. But I kind of feel like you mentioned every single safety feature that's out there. Are there others that you want to comment on? I love that you mentioned distracted driving. So it seems like anything that improves active driving and reduces distracted driving, because we know that distracted driving causes 3,000 or so deaths just in the US alone every year. You probably have more accurate measurements on that. So are there any other features out there that maybe they're out there, they haven't really proved their worth yet?
Yeah, and before we move on to that, I did want to point out I left out another one that I just want to give a short plug to, which is rear automatic emergency braking. Not nearly as common, but you do see it on some vehicles where if you're in a parking lot backing up, there's a pole, it'll automatically stop. These sorts of crashes don't typically result in injuries, but they can result in big property damage claims, big headaches. So, and we see huge reductions, like 78% reduction in those types of crashes when you get all that technology on the back of your vehicle. But anyway, to answer the question you just asked, one technology that gets a lot of buzz that has yet to show any safety benefits would be these level 2 automated driving systems. So this is like Tesla's autopilot system or Cadillac Super Cruise, that are essentially combining adaptive cruise control technology with lane centering, right? Which essentially allows you the vehicle to sort of drive itself on certain roads. Now, of course, all of these technologies require you to maintain your vigilance and make sure that you're paying attention. But we haven't yet seen in the actual data that these types of systems are actually conferring any real crash reduction. So that's one that maybe is more of a driving convenience feature than necessarily a safety feature. So that's something to keep in mind.
Oh yeah, and they're not cheap either. So that is really good to know. Thank you, Joe. Okay, so let's talk about headlights. I don't know that there's a driver out there that hasn't been blinded by headlights. I think because I'm shorter, it always seems that oncoming traffic causes a problem for me. Now, you test for headlights, which I am all for. So let's talk about this new headlight program. First of all, is it normal to have all these new program launches, or is it IIHS pivoting to keep up with all this new technology that's coming to market?
Well, the headlight test program we've had in place as it stands for several years now. We do have a few other brand new test programs that are coming out, but I will say, yeah, probably, 6 or 7 years ago, we did sort of have a pivot where we started looking at, rather than looking at crash worthiness and how a vehicle holds up in a crash, how can we keep vehicles out of crashes? And so launching our headlight test program was definitely part of that, right? We looked at the performance of vehicles that you can buy in the US, and what we found is that there's just a dramatic range of actual performance in how well a vehicle lights the road, even though all of these vehicles meet the federal standard, right? So they all meet whatever's required by the government, but in practice, there's a huge variation. So we started doing tests where we're actually running vehicles at night outside on a closed test track where we are essentially driving the vehicles at fixed speeds while measuring light down the road in various spots. So we're measuring for two different things. We're measuring for visibility, which of course is really important for you as the driver, but we're also measuring glare because we know that it's really easy to just throw out a ton of light. I mean, you could just have your high beams on all the time if that were the case, but you can't be glaring other drivers because that's a serious safety concern. So essentially, a vehicle that's going to get our top rating of good in our headlight evaluations, it's going to do a really good job of putting light down the road, but only in the right places. So it's not going to glare oncoming drivers. And we've had plenty of vehicles that have come through that have gotten poor ratings in our tests purely because they just put way too much glare into the eyes of other drivers. And we've seen automakers really respond to the headlight evaluations. I think it was challenging at first, but we're starting to see them really, really get it. And what we saw there was a demonstration of curve adaptive headlights, which are becoming more and more common. These actually swivel into the turn as you're kind of going through a curve. And there's no silver bullet for acing our headlight evaluations, but we have seen that the curve adaptive headlights can do pretty well. LED headlights tend to do pretty well, but we've also seen HID headlights perform well in some cases. But what we're really trying to do is get the automakers to equip their vehicles with headlights that do a good job of lighting the road. They don't glare at oncoming drivers. And we're actually really pushing them to then get rid of their base headlights, which may not perform as well. We really want good headlight performance to be standard equipment on vehicles. So that's what we're pushing for with that headlight evaluation.
Oh my gosh, I am all here for it, Joe. Holy moly. I mean, very recently almost got into what could have been a very, very bad accident because I had a truck coming towards me and blinded me for a split second. And I didn't realize there was a car stopped in the road in front of me. And luckily I was able to swerve and avoid it. But I did notice that you had said that some vehicles, just because of the height, maybe, is it they just don't perform well and they cannot get a top safety rating from IIHS if they are providing glare to oncoming traffic. Is that right? They have to do well on their headlight test, right?
Yeah. So again, I mean, since we're not a regulatory agency, plenty of vehicles come through and have poor rated headlights, but to get our top safety pick awards, we're encouraged. Headlight performance is part of that, right? So to your point, we've seen some specific vehicle classes struggle with headlights. Like bigger SUVs and pickup trucks, they tend to sit a little bit higher. So we've found that maybe they've had a harder time finding that right balance between providing the visibility that's required, but without glaring oncoming drivers. But we've seen improvements, and in fact, our top safety pick list this year has several pickup trucks on it. We've got several minivans on there. We've got quite a few SUVs on there. So they're definitely starting to get it.
So they're starting to get it. I love it. Okay, got another question that came in. Does IIHS recommend 24-hour headlights? So driving headlights.
Yeah, I'm not sure that we've necessarily made that recommendation in the past. Of course, daytime running lights, have been studied and been found to help to help improve visibility of those vehicles. But yeah, I mean, I personally, on a personal note, I tend to run with my headlights on all the time because I just think it's good practice. So I think it's a good thing to do. But yeah, again, one thing that's kind of to that point is high beams, which research has found that people just don't use high beams very often at night when they should be. So, we found that a lot of people would be driving around just not using those high beams. So high beam assist, which is a technology that is on a lot of cars, will automatically toggle between low beam and high beams depending on the presence of other vehicles.
Huh.
That's something that actually gets extra credit in our headlight ratings because we know people do not use their high beams nearly enough.
Will it also turn them off if a car is coming and the high beams shouldn't be on?
Right, exactly. Yeah, it switches back and forth based on the presence of other cars. So if there's another car coming, it's going to turn them off.
That is awesome. Okay, so let's get to it. I'm very excited. IIHS, we all know it. They've been putting out their annual lists of top safety picks. And yes, I am here for it. Consumers love it. I love it too. So, first of all, Joe, how do you compile the list? There must be like a point system. How does a car actually earn a top safety pick? So we have the crash test, we have the headlight test. There's a lot more that probably goes into it, huh?
Yeah, so there's the crash worthiness tests are a big part of it. So I mentioned earlier we had 6 crash tests that we run. So to get either our top safety pick or top safety pick plus award in 2022, a vehicle needs to get a good rating. That's our top rating in all 6 of those crash tests. It also needs to score a advanced or superior rating in vehicle to vehicle and pedestrian front crash prevention tests.
Okay.
And then finally, headlights. It needs to have headlights that rate either acceptable or good as an option in order to qualify for the top safety pick award. And the top safety pick plus award is actually reserved for models where those acceptable or good headlights are standard equipment across all trims, all packages. So when you go out and buy a top safety pick plus, you're going to come away with decent headlights regardless of if you're buying the base trim or you're paying for all the extras.
Fantastic. Okay, so you put out the list once a year, but correct me if I'm wrong. It keeps growing as you add more and more results.
Yeah, we do. We put out an initial list. Usually at the beginning of the year, we actually just put out our initial 2022 top safety picks in February. But throughout the year, we do add more. In fact, we just announced earlier this week that the Toyota Corolla sedan and hatchback have recently qualified. So those are 2 new additions. So I think that brings us up to 103 models so far that have qualified for one of the 2 awards. And you can see here, there's really something for everybody. We've got vehicles in all different classes. And especially this year, I know that shopping for a new vehicle can be really challenging with shortages and so forth. So within given category, you've got quite a few options. So there's kind of something for everybody on this list. And by the way, if you're looking for a used vehicle, you can always go and toggle back and look at top safety picks from previous years as well. What I would point out, though, is that we tend to change the criteria each year to make things a little more challenging for the automakers and to keep pushing improvements. So, if you go back and shop for a 2016 top safety pick, it's going to have quite a different criteria than 2022. And we've got really big changes coming in 2023, by the way, with two brand new tests that are going to factor into the awards.
Wow. How much advance notice do you give the manufacturers when you have a new test coming out?
They know what's coming. They're well aware that what we're working on. They know, in this particular case in 2023, we're going to be introducing that new updated side crash test. You're going to need a good or acceptable rating in that test to qualify. And then also we've got, I mentioned earlier, we do tests of automatic emergency braking systems for pedestrians. Well, we did some research recently and found that these systems are cutting real-world pedestrian crashes by about 30%, but they don't work very well at night. And in many cases, that's when they're really needed. So we've actually just launched a new nighttime pedestrian AEB test as well. So it's similar, but we're essentially testing in very low light conditions. And what we've seen in our research phase so far is that vehicles just aren't performing super well. So the automaker is going to have to step up their game there for sure.
30% reduction in pedestrian crashes is huge. But yes, there's lots of room for improvement. Agreed. Yeah. Okay, so I'm so glad we got to see the top safety picks live on the website just a few moments ago, and I saw some pretty impressive cars on that list. I'd love to talk to you. If we went by segment, I know you said obviously we think of sedans. They seem to be pretty safe. But I know you had said earlier, hey, there's lots more minivans on the list. There's lots more trucks on the list, and trucks are the number one segment right now. Were there any that stood out to you? Any pleasant surprises you could tell us about? Or your
Yeah,
favorites? It's something that performed really, really well?
yeah, I think you're going to see a couple changes on this year's list than you've seen in past years. One is pickups. We've got, I want to say, 4 different pickup models on this list this year. So, folks that are shopping for a pickup, you've got some choices for sure. Minivans is another segment. We haven't seen a lot of award winners in recent years, but there are several minivans on the list this year. And then another change has been electric vehicles. We've got quite a few EVs on the top safety pick list this year. We've been doing more and more tests of those. So there's a couple models from Tesla. You've got the Audi e-tron there, Volvo XC40 Recharge, and the new the Ford Mustang Mach-E, also a top safety pick. So if you're in the market for electric vehicles as well, there's some options on there.
Oh my goodness. I'm so glad you brought up electric vehicles because I feel like they're in the news all the time. Every manufacturer is putting out so much content online, on social about their new electric vehicles that are going to come out and unveiling them. And oh gosh, it's big news. But I'm sure it's no surprise to you that there's a lot of talk about why people aren't buying. I mean, a lot of people are buying electric vehicles. Let's not discount it, but a lot of people are holding off on buying an electric vehicle because of, they're worried about the range. They're worried about the lack of charging stations. We don't have that electric vehicle infrastructure yet here in the United States. It's getting there. It's not there yet. So people are waiting. And then there are some people who, I've seen stories out there that electric vehicle batteries are a fire hazard. You're not supposed to park your car inside your house while it's charging. It might cause a fire. No one wants that. What do you know? Can you talk about EV
Sure.
safety and what your research has shown? Are any of these founded? Any of these
Well,
concerns?
yeah, I can kind of approach that from a couple of different directions. I mean, the first is, our crash testing that we run in-house. So, we approach electric vehicles, pretty much the same way as, internal combustion engine vehicles, which is that the rating really depends on the same things, right? We're looking at how well the occupant compartment holds up. We're looking at, how well the restraint systems work and the dummy injury measures that are recorded by the crash test dummies. But there are some special procedures we put in place because, there can be an issue with an electric vehicle's battery, for example, having this thermal runaway event where it turns into a fire, similar to how, a regular gas vehicle could have a fuel leak, which could also be a major fire hazard. So we do have some specific procedures in place where we're closely monitoring those batteries. But so far, we haven't had any issues. It seems like the automakers are taking this very seriously and, protecting those batteries to make sure there's no issue in crashes that are pretty serious. I mean, 40-mile-per-hour frontal crash into a barrier is a very serious crash, and we've seen them hold up pretty well.
That is
Fires.
awesome.
Fires. I think again, this is something when there's a fire, it gets a lot of media attention. But the thing about non-crash fires that happen, as a result of something that's not a crash, right? These sort of spontaneous fires, whether we're talking about EVs or we're talking about ICE vehicles. These are very, very rare events, right? So they don't happen very often. They become more common as vehicles age. So that's one thing to keep in mind. We don't have a lot of really old electric vehicles in the fleet, so that's something we're going to be keeping a close eye on. But so far, there's no indication that necessarily these non-crash fires with EVs are more common than they are with gas-powered vehicles. Now, with that in mind, I'd always encourage you, if you have a vehicle that's got a recall, an open recall, make sure to take that very seriously, whether we're talking about a battery issue or something else. Take that seriously. Get that recall taken care of as quickly as you can, for sure. But from another standpoint, EVs are actually showing there might be a safety benefit, and it really comes down to physics. EVs are really heavy. They weigh, the Audi e-tron, I want to say, weighs upwards of 6,000 pounds. The new Hummer H EV that they're introducing is supposed to weigh up to about 9,000 pounds, which is really heavy.
That's really heavy. Oh my God.
But when you take two identical vehicles, you've got a version that's electric and you've got a version that's gas powered. Well, we've looked at the data. We've gone and dug through the insurance data, and found that folks that are in those electric vehicles have lower risk of injury, lower rates of injury, I should say. And we think that that's because of the added weight from these vehicles. You know, you get into a multi-vehicle crash, again, if you have that big battery, that's providing a little bit more momentum on your side of the crash. Now, obviously, there's the flip side to that. The other vehicle has to take that extra energy, so that's a concern as well. But so far, that's what we're seeing in the insurance data, is that weight could be playing a role.
Joe, I can't thank you enough. This was just an amazing amount of fantastic information that you provided us in this last half hour to help guide us toward finding the safest vehicles for our families. Excuse the pun, but is there anything else coming down the road for IIHS and also for HLDI while we're at it?
Yeah, so we've got, like I said, we've got a lot of new stuff coming. We've actually tomorrow got a brand new test program. We are releasing ratings for the first test group. It might be shocking to some folks watching this that there's still plenty of people out there that don't buckle their seatbelts.
Stop.
Yeah, so you know, up front in the front seats, we have about 91% of people buckle up. In the back seats, it's lower, like 73%. So we know that one easy way to get people to buckle up is better seatbelt reminders. You know, the federal government requires pretty short reminders that only last about 4 to 8 seconds, you know, with a visual indicator that doesn't last very long. So we've actually established a new ratings program for seatbelt reminders. And for vehicles to get our top rating, they're going to need really persistent reminders, you know, with visual indicators that, you know, essentially annoy the person badly enough that they're going to put on that seatbelt, because we know that they work. The research has shown actually that persistent belt reminders can be as effective as an interlock in getting people to belt up. So folks might get in, they just might not be thinking about it, but that persistent belt reminder will get them to buckle up. So we've got our first test group coming out tomorrow, which includes a bunch of popular SUVs. So please keep an eye on our website to see how they stacked up. And let me just, you know, I'll just say there's plenty of room for improvement.
I agree. You know, it wasn't too long ago on another broadcast, we talked about safety for teenagers in cars. And that was actually brought up. And I think it was something awful like 45% of maybe you probably know the number of teenagers don't actually buckle up. Can you tell us a little bit more about which age groups maybe are more affected, or is it rear passengers who don't buckle up? What information do you know?
Yeah, so I mean, certainly, you know, teens from a variety of angles need help with safety. So certainly buckling up. We need to make sure they buckle up, but there's lots of ways we can improve safety for teens, whether it's vehicle choice, limiting the number of other people in the vehicle, restricting the hours they can drive. All of these things are shown to reduce teen fatalities. But to your point about seating position, yeah, we know that people are less likely to buckle up in the back seat. People will get into, you know, a Lyft or an Uber, you know, and you just don't think about it. It's a short trip. I'm not going to buckle up. But it only takes a second. And by the way, if you're the driver and you've got someone in the back seat that's not buckled up and you're in a frontal crash, that person is a projectile. They're going to come slamming into the back of you, and all the safety features around you aren't going to work because you're going to be getting sort of pancaked into the steering wheel. In fact, we've got some very compelling crash test videos showing that exact thing that we're going to be releasing tomorrow as well. So, you know, that's something to keep in mind. So having a rear seat indicator in all vehicles would be really helpful, because you as the driver should know if that person behind you is belted up or not, because it could very well impact you in a crash.
Oh my gosh, you are doing great work over at IIHS, and I am so grateful for it. And I know there's a lot of other people, drivers, moms, first responders, you name it, who just really respect the work that you are doing over there at IIHS. Please keep up the great work. And audience, you can catch up with everything the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety is up to by visiting their website. And Joe, thank you so much for being here today.
Absolutely.
Fantastic conversation. And I'm just going to put you on the spot right now. I'm totally going to have you back on another bestride.com Facebook Live if you'll let me.
Yep.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much, Joe. Amazing information. And yeah, short plug right now for bestride.com. Of course, it's the smartest, easiest way to find a car online. You know, at Best Ride, you can find numerous vehicles to consider, and it'll help you narrow down to the one that's right for you. Yeah, safety rating, sure. But you know what? You can search by body style. You can connect with local car dealers. You can read reviews, industry news. You can search by new, used, certified, pre owned. And then, of course, with our friends over at IIHS, you can also check out if it's a used car, what their safety rating is. If it's a new car, did they win an IIHS safety pick? All kinds of things, and find the car that's right for you. Literally, search millions of cars, find your best ride. And if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions regarding our broadcast and our topics, I'd love to hear from you. Please contact me directly. Again, my name is Eliana Raggio, and you can get to me by emailing me at eliana@bestride.com. On behalf of Joe Young and the wonderful team at the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety, and of course, the rest of the amazing crew at bestride.com, thank you all so very much for spending this time with us today. And I hope to see you all on another broadcast from your friends at bestride.com. Take care, everyone.